committee, Dr. Aisha El-Amin, Dr. Gloria Bashir, and Sister Rashida Fitzpatrick. My name is Lionel Allen Jr., and I'm pleased to join you today for our Talim. Today's Talim is going to focus on my new book that was just published in June of this year. It's called Lead with Care, Strategies to Build Culturally Competent and Affirming Schools. I'm going to provide a overview of the book, go through each component of the framework that serves as the sort of the foundation for the book, and then hopefully save a little time at the end for Q&A. Initially, today's Talim was going to be held in person. We decided that it was best to do so virtually. And so the plan, inshallah, is to have a book signing event where I can share my books with the community and engage with folks about the topic of the book at a later date. So there's more information that is forthcoming regarding that. Before I begin, I just want to say what a blessing it is to be a part of this beautiful community of Muslims. There's so much expertise and talent. Last week, we had the good fortune of listening to a presentation delivered by our dear brother, Bill Chambers, on the history of the FBI. It was such a rich presentation, and I'm hoping, I know he's not on the call, but I'm hoping that he will do a part two at some point. There was just a lot of really important information that I think was relevant and timely as well. But I could speak to so many presenters from our community that have just done an outstanding job of sharing their expertise and their wisdom with us. And I think it's, and I know I'm a little bit on my soapbox. I promise I'm gonna jump off in a few minutes. But I think it's something that we sometimes take for granted because we are a part of this community. We don't necessarily always acknowledge the brilliance that we have. And so inshallah, we'll continue to be able to execute these wonderful taleems and continue to add to our knowledge base, and that we'll lean on each other to get better, to become more knowledgeable, more understanding of the world around us. So yeah, I just wanted to share that before I got started. So I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen now with you. And what I want to do today, and I could talk for hours about this topic, and certainly only have about 40 minutes. And so I'm going to take a pretty complex set of strategies and concepts and try to break them down into smaller chunks so that I can at least provide those of you that are with me this afternoon with, again, a overview, a high-level overview of the book and what I'm trying to accomplish through the writing of the book. So the name of the book, again, is Lead with Care, and CARE is an acronym that stands for Cultural Responsiveness, Affirmation, Relationships, and Empowerment. And in the book, I make an argument essentially that we as educators have a history of focusing too much on student outcomes, focusing too much on results, and that the hyper focus on outcomes, and just to be clear, when I say outcomes, when I'm essentially talking about our test scores, that our schools and our school districts have for years had a hyper focus on quantifiable metrics. In other words, what percentage of students are meeting or exceeding in reading? What percentage of students are meeting or exceeding in mathematics? Fill in the blank content area. But that's sort of been the grammar of American schooling probably for the last 25, 30 years. That it's always about, are we boosting test scores? Are we showing improvement through metrics that are measurable? Can we put the data in a spreadsheet to justify our existence? And that sort of hyper focus on test scores, on achievement scores, on the results of standardized tests has drastically undermined the academic experience of our children. And so what we've done is we've created these oppressive educational spaces where students are under a great deal of pressure to hit some arbitrary mark. And there's a lot wrong with standardized testing. And I won't say much more than this. That standardized tests were created by for-profit companies, that they are in the business of making money. And we know that the only way that businesses make money is by proving that they're relevant. And they prove that they're relevant through a lot of means. Many of them are flawed. And so we have accepted, when I say we, the educational community has accepted this sort of flawed partnership with these standardized test companies. And we use their tests to determine how smart we are making our students. The problem is that standardized tests don't tell you much. In fact, they only tell you how well a student is able to perform on a given exam at a particular time of day. That's it, right? It doesn't really tell you how smart they are. And we know that because we know that students who have testing anxiety or students who just generally don't perform on standardized tests are sometimes your most talented, your most creative, and some of your most intelligent students. But the tests don't necessarily show that because, again, tests can't really measure a student's intellectual capability, right? And that's unfortunate because we know the meaning that we assign to test scores. So our students are labeled as, honors or not honors based on the results of a test. Our students are labeled, as on track to go to college or not, oftentimes based on the results of a test. Schools are graded based on the results of the test, right? And so we have, educators who are caught in this web, this unfortunate web of pressure to get results. And we've accepted it as an educational community. We even hear people who say things like, you may have even seen this before, heard people say this, that I'm a data-driven instructional leader. I'm a data-driven leader. I'm a results-oriented leader. And we say these things as if it's okay. The reality is, if you are someone who's only focused on results, if you're someone who's only focused on data, you're probably not a very good leader. And that's the reality. You certainly aren't a very good school leader. You might be a great leader in other sectors, but you can't be a great school leader and only be focused on results and only be focused on data, because we know that the data is misleading and oftentimes the results are misleading too. And so in this book, I make the argument that if we really care about improving academic outcomes, if we want our students to perform better in school, we have to start to prioritize culture. That is the culture of the school that dictates the experiences of our students. And so we cannot expect, in good conscience, for our students to perform well in school when they are having harmful academic experiences, right? It's no different than an adult. No adult is going to perform well on their job if they don't like the company that they work for. If the workplace culture is toxic, they're not going to perform well. Yet we expect our students, children, who go to school because education in the United States is compulsory until the age of 16. So they are forced to go to school. Right? And oftentimes the schools that they attend, particularly when we're talking about African-American and Latino students, or any student that's not white, is not Christian, they oftentimes are othered or marginalized within the school context. And yet we expect them to perform. It really, when you think about it, at least when I say it out loud, it's like, duh, how did we have not figured this out yet? It's really unfortunate. But year after year after year, we continue to focus on results and we don't focus nearly enough on culture. So the central argument of this book is as follows: that if schools establish a culture that's built on cultural responsiveness, affirmation, relationship, and empowerment, that they will dramatically improve the academic experience of often marginalized student groups, which will lead to improved outcomes. In other words, when we start to create schools that kids enjoy coming to every day, they're going to do better. It's that simple. But again, two historical events that I'm gonna talk about that have really undermined the experiences, particularly of African American students, and I'm going to center them in this conversation because I think it's important that you sort of understand where I'm coming from. And obviously, when I use the term marginalized or historically minoritized students, I'm talking about all students who have been harmed by this educational system uh, that in many ways was not designed to serve their interests anyway. Right? We know that when schools were first established, they weren't considering the needs of African American students in particular. They weren't considering the needs of Latino students. They weren't even considering the needs of young women, right? Like when schools first began to be established, and I'm not talking about the schools that were established by Black folks. I'm talking about the schools that were established by white folks. That those schools, right, were not established with the needs of our children in mind. And I think it's important that we understand that. But I want to point to two events, if you will, in particular that have really undermined the in-school experiences of African American children. The first was the forced desegregation of schools by way of Brown versus Board of Education, 1954. And the reason why that's such a pivotal point to sort of turn to as we think about the creation of schools or the establishment of schools that did harm to Black children, and is because 38,000 African Americans lost their jobs as a result of Brown versus Board of Education. 38,000, right? So that decision, and we know the intent behind the decision, but that decision weakened the educational infrastructure in the Black community. Black schools shut down. Black students were sent to white schools. Obviously, those teachers who did not affirm the humanity or even see the humanity in those Black children did not want them there, and they treated them as such. Right? We had to fight. Right? Students had to have federal National Guard protection in order to attend school. We know the stories. I won't go down that history. We're pretty familiar with that, but I think it's important that we acknowledge that our students were sent to be educated in hostile spaces. In other words, we were sending our children to schools where they were going to be educated by their oppressors, right? And so that immediately causes not only a drastic sort of reduction in levels of student engagement, Black children who knew that they weren't welcome. It, of course, affected their performance. A lot of students opted out of school, but if we talk about it more broadly, Black teachers lost their jobs, Black administrators, Black principals, Black superintendents lost their jobs. They were now relegated to custodians and janitors, right? Because they would not be hired by schools that were serving white children and that were run by white district level administrators and white school boards. So, right, that was the initial sort of undermining of the Black academic or Black educational experience in the United States of America. The second event that I'll point to that really undermined the experiences was No Child Left Behind, which was signed into law by George Bush in 2002, which essentially said that every child will be reading and performing at grade level in both math and reading. I think it was by 2014. All right. And so the theory behind No Child Left Behind is that we're going to ratchet up accountability of schools to make sure that they are serving students' needs and that we are improving achievement levels and increasing test scores, et cetera, by 2014. What George Bush and his team did not realize is that increasing accountability does not necessarily equate to school improvement, right? So what happened is that school districts responded to No Child Left Behind in very different ways. And because of the accountability portions of this legislation, schools could be labeled as failing, they could be closed, teachers will lose their jobs. And so when people are afraid, when they're trying to survive, they sometimes respond in destructive ways. And so again, not to spend too much time on No Child Left Behind, but I think it's important to realize is that because No Child Left Behind paid particular attention to reading and mathematics scores, what ended up happening is schools only focused on reading and mathematics. So you have generations of students, a generation of students, I should say, that have never had science or social studies in school. Or if they have had science and social studies, it was not a robust curricular experience, right? It was an add-on. I know many schools in the city of Chicago, in particular, schools that serve African American children, where the accountability measures that were included in No Child Left Behind were probably the most oppressive They had reading at the beginning of the day, and then after lunch they had math. And they were drilled and killed because the name of the game was to boost test scores, right? And so I hope that you can understand, how that experience that those students face, how it drastically undermined their academic experience. Imagine going to a school where you don't have electives, where the focus is not on your learning and development in appropriate ways. The focus of the school is get you to increase your score on that test. Now you're, 8, 9, 10, 11 years old. You don't know what's at stake. The teachers do. The teachers know that if we don't get these scores up significantly, they're going to shut my school down. I don't have a job. So I'm going to, by hook or by crook, I'm going to make sure that we improve scores. So you have schools that were adopting all of these problematic methodologies to try to improve test scores, whether it was spending the entire day only focused on the test, all types of programs designed to drill and kill, after school programs, weekend programs, all types of interventions. And dear brothers and sisters, I can say this isn't something that I read. This was something that I unfortunately participated in because I was a principal of an elementary school in 2006. So I led under the pressures of No Child Left Behind. And I too enacted some of these problematic methods trying to improve test scores because that was the pressure that we were under. And so part of my mission or objective in writing this book is to help educators see that we've gotten it wrong, that the way in which we have structured our academic environments in our schools is in fact upside down. That if we focus more on making sure that the experience is one where Black and brown and minoritized students feel seen, heard, affirmed, valued, and cared for, if we get that part right, everything else will take care of itself. Now, I know that there are situations that are happening outside of school. Our students are subjected to things at home and in the streets that sometimes will make it difficult for them to fully engage in learning. But we can't control that, right? What we can control is what happens within the proverbial four walls of our school. So my argument is that, hey, let's forget about test scores and let's develop a whole child. Like, let's focus on their social emotional health. Let's focus on their sense of well-being. Let's focus on building their academic self-esteem. And again, if we do that, then we will see the improved outcomes that we so desperately want to see. So let's talk about why school culture is so important to me. And again, this is you're listening to someone who benefited from being in schools where I felt affirmed, where I felt good about being me, where I had teachers who poured into me and invested. And I went to Chicago public schools in the 1980s and 90s. So I know it's possible. Sometimes, you talk to educators and you say things and they say, well, I don't know if that's possible in my school. No, it's possible. I was a student in Chicago public schools in the 1980s and 90s when, 1,000 people were being murdered in the streets of Chicago, where crack cocaine and gang violence and intersection of poverty and violence and community disinvestment were all happening in my very neighborhood. And so the school for me became a safe space. It became my outlet, right? I felt like I can go to school and there was an escape from the realities of the streets that I lived in, that my house sat on. Like, I was able to escape from those things because I had teachers who really valued school culture. And so, and valued me as a human being. Forget about how smart I was, and what I struggled with academically, or what I was really good at academically. They saw me as a human being, right? And I think that's the first step. And that's what we've lost in our schools, right? So we talk a lot about things like the achievement gap, and we talk about the opportunity gap, and we talk about the attitude gap. And these are all terminologies that now exist within the educational lexicon that people usually speak to or speak about. But we don't talk nearly enough about the humanity gap. That because many of our schools, and this isn't to cast aspersions on any particular group, but we know that nationally, 80% of public school teachers are middle-class white. And we also know that nationally, that 80% of principals, of school leaders, are white. And of that 80% are white male. So we know that there's a cultural disconnection between many of the students that are being served in our public schools and those who lead them and those who teach in them. We know that. We also know, because the data tells us and the research tells us and our experiences tell us, is that for many of our children of color, school is a hostile space for them. They are either invisible or they're hypervisible. And what I mean by that is people either aren't paying attention to their needs because they don't care enough about them to pay attention to their needs, or they're in a school where if they sneeze, someone's calling the school resource officer. Where whatever they do, if they move funny, if they stand up too fast, if they sit down too slow, the dean is being called and they're being removed from the classroom. So we know that these experiences that our Black and brown students in particular, and our poor white students too, are having, right? It again, you've heard me use this phrase a lot today, it undermines their experience. I'm in a school, I know that no one wants me here. I don't have the complexion for the connection. I don't have the right social class. I don't come from the right socioeconomic class, and I feel it. We also know that Black folks are that folks are socialized into believing that Black folks in particular are inferior to them. That we should not be afforded the same rights as others because we're less than. That's how we've been socialized. Right? People have been socialized into believing that Black folks, particularly Black children, are less hardworking, less trustful, less smart, right? And more prone to criminal deviancy. This is what most people think. They might not say it out loud, but this is how they've been socialized. So you take that, and you take a group of Black students, you put them into a classroom where they don't share a racial or cultural connection with their teacher, a teacher who doesn't see the humanity in that child, and that child can't learn in that environment. And if they do learn, it comes with them losing a part of who they are. They have to shed their identities, right, in order to be able to fully engage in the educative process, in order for them to be accepted into that school, into that classroom. So we know that this is happening. And so we're asking our students to excel in a toxic culture. And so what we often see happening in our schools is these racially predictive outcomes and these achievement disparities that lie along race. So it doesn't matter. And I would challenge any of you, if you don't believe what I'm saying, to go to Illinois school report cards, type in the name of any school in the state of Illinois. And if you were to break down their academic data, their achievement data by race, you will always see Asian students at the top, white students, and then Black and brown students at the bottom of the academic totem. Always. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you are in Chicago, you can be in Decatur, you can be in Peoria, you can go to Compton, you go to New York City, go to Florida. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. That is how the data plays out. Black and brown students are always at the bottom. And if you control for language status, Black students are always going to be at the very bottom. There's an argument to be made that Latino students, when they do underperform, when they do perform worse than Black students, oftentimes is because of a language barrier. Right? So, and that should be haunting to all of us, that it doesn't matter what state, Massachusetts, Florida, Texas, Chicago, doesn't matter. Illinois, doesn't matter. Black students are always performing worse than everyone else. At some point, we have to ask ourselves, why does this continue to happen? As a matter of fact, it happens globally. If you go to London, places like Leeds, and you look at their achievement data and you disaggregate by race, you see that the Black students are again at the bottom of the academic totem pole. We have to ask ourselves, why is that? And what we do, instead of asking ourselves, why is it that Black and brown students don't perform in our schools, what we do is we blame the students and we blame their families. And we say stuff like, Black kids today just don't care about school, or Black families don't value education. And people say that crap and they have no clue what they're talking about. No clue. Because it was newly emancipated African-American folks in the South who in 1869, with their own money, raised $1 million to start public schools for Black children in the South in 1869. Education has always been seen in our community as the ticket to true liberation and freedom. And I don't have to say this to you all. You all know this. I'm preaching to the choir here. But I just want you to be cognizant of people who think that way and make sure that we check them when they say that kind of stuff, because people will let it roll off of their tongues as if it's accepted truth. Right? It's accepted truth that Black families don't care about education. And I point to this quote from this brilliant sharecropper who said, look, if a farmer is trying to grow corn and the corn don't grow, he don't blame the corn. Our students aren't performing or achieving in our schools, yet we continue to blame the child, who really is a captive audience in school. Like, they got to be there. They don't have a choice, right? The 6-year-olds are sitting around, looking at school profiles and deciding what schools they're going to attend. They don't have a choice in the matter. They don't get to hire the teachers. They don't hire the principal. They come to school ready to learn with their brand new book bag, skipping to school on the first day of school. And then they get there and they receive all of these messages that you're not really wanted here. You're really wanted here. And so our job, and again, I ask educators to take this on. Our job is to repair a culture, to restore a culture that has historically harmed Black and brown kids. That until we work on the culture of the school, until we work on the mindsets of the teachers that are in the school, it doesn't matter how many strategies we have. We're not short on strategies in school. We got a bunch of strategies. Every year we're rolling out new strategies and new ways of teaching reading and new ways of teaching mathematics and all these technologies that we invest in. Everybody has to have an iPad. Everybody has to have a laptop, or we invest in smart boards and all these new shiny tools. And none of it means a doggone bit of difference, because the people who are using these tools don't have the right mindsets about our kids. They don't love our kids. They don't see the humanity in our kids. So it doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. You give a carpenter a hammer and a saw, and they can build and they can create. You give me a hammer and a saw, and I'm destroying. There's no difference. There's no difference. I don't have the right mindset. I don't have the skill set to build. A lot of our educators, unfortunately, and there's some great educators, there's some great teachers, right? I don't want this to come off as an anti-teacher rant. That's not what I'm saying at all. But there's enough bad apples. There's enough people, enough educators, enough teachers, enough principals and assistant principals who don't have the right mindsets about our children. So we give them these tools, and they continue to create these destructive learning environments for our children. So I don't want, and maybe there are parents or grandparents that are on this call. I don't want anyone to be lulled to sleep by a school that maybe your children or grandchildren go to, and they are celebrating and advertising all the great new things that they have as if that's the answer, and it's not. When people come to me all the time, I have friends who say, I'm moving out to the suburbs. Why are you moving out to the suburbs? So my child can get a better education. Well, how do you know that they're going to get a better education? Well, because the school is new and it's well-resourced. That doesn't mean anything. Black folks were educated in one-room schoolhouses, and many of those people went on and got PhDs, right? In Jim Crow South, they were educated, right? Hiding, sneaking to educate their children. No resources, because it had nothing to do with resources and everything to do with what? The heart, the mind, the culture that you create, a culture of no-nonsense nurturing where, hey, you demand the very best of every child that you come into contact with. You love on that child, you make that child feel good, but you're going to give me your very best. Why? Because I expect that of you. And what we have too much of today are our students go into schools, people have low expectations of them because what? The culture allows teachers and educators in that school to have low expectations of Black and brown kids. So you have students who are, juniors in high school that can't read at the 5th grade level because they've been passed along, right, by the soft bigotry of low expectation. Right? They've created these contracts. I'm gonna sit in the back and I'm gonna be quiet. And I'm not gonna, cause a fuss. But in return for me being quiet, don't try to make me do too much work. And teachers who don't have relationships with kids will eat that up and say, perfect, right? I'll take that deal. There's actually a term for it. It's called deal making in schools, where students are allowed to disengage from the learning process. And the unspoken agreement is you can disengage from learning, just don't be disruptive in my class. So the cultures in our schools, unfortunately, in many of our schools that serve Black and brown kids, the cultures are toxic. Right? Our kids aren't loved on, they aren't affirmed, and in many cases they are excluded. And let me give you a couple of examples of what it means to be excluded: suspensions and expulsions. A lot of people don't know this, but the demographic group of students who are the most suspended and expelled, and they nationally now they have passed some legislation to address this. But as recently as 5-6 years ago, the most suspended and most expelled demographic group of students were African American male pre-kindergartners, right? So we're talking about 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds who are being excluded from the school environment, who are receiving messaging from the teachers that have been charged to care for them, charged with their intellectual and social emotional development, are being told, we don't really want you here, as early as 3-4 years old. I saw it as a principal when I had teachers who were kindergarten teachers in some instances, who were trying to remove students from the learning environment as early as kindergarten. 5 years old, right? This kid is a problem. He's 5. Right? What do we do? How do we then address his needs? Because it's not his fault. Right. And so I share this quote that you see: the child who's not embraced by the village will burn it down to feel its warmth, because it's happening right now as we speak. When we talk about students who engage in tremendously disruptive behaviors, it's because they aren't being welcomed by the village that is supposed to be the school. And we don't just see it happening in schools that serve kids of color. We see it in white schools too. Kids who come to school and shooting up schools, right? Because they aren't being embraced by that village. I'm not blaming victims of school shooting. I want to be very clear about that. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is we as a school, as an industry, we aren't doing enough to address the needs of our students. And when bad things happen, when students engage in destructive behaviors like bullying, when they are fighting their classmates and engaging in these interpersonal conflicts, instead of us asking ourselves, well, what is it that we can do differently culturally to make sure that our students are being treated fairly and have the resources that they need, and access to social workers and access to counselors. Instead of doing that, what we do is we say, that's just a bad kid. And we label a kid and we label their family. Instead of spending so much money on these smart boards, let's get more social workers and counselors in our schools. Right? Everything comes from a blaming of the kid and the family, blaming the victim for the circumstances that they found themselves in. And so we see examples all across the nation of our children engaging in destructive behaviors. And we know that social media helps fan the flames of that, right? Because our kids are constantly being told that they're not good enough. They're bombarded with messages that they're not good enough, where they're comparing themselves to others. And then they come to school and they're receiving messages from adults that are supposed to be taking care of them, that they aren't good enough. And so we've never seen in the history of our country, we've never seen this many teenagers being diagnosed with depression and anxiety-related illnesses. It's because they don't have a place to go to where they feel seen and heard. Folks can disagree with me, but I believe the school should be that place. But we haven't done enough to address the culture of our school. So let me just go through each component of this framework. So the beauty of this framework is in its simplicity. And again, the theory of action is clear. If we build a culture that rests upon the pillars of care, culture, responsiveness, affirmation, relationships, and empowerment, then we will transform the experiences that our students have in schools. Transform those experiences. And once we transform the experiences, the results and the outcomes will come. And again, that's the theory behind this book. So when it comes to cultural responsiveness, the guiding question for us to be thinking about, and again, those of you who are parents or grandparents of children, I want you to think about this when you go and you visit the school, you go for parent-teacher conferences, et cetera. And the question is this: how can we create a school and classroom environment that acknowledges, responds to, and celebrates students' cultural diversity? And what I want you to think about when you go into those schools is, where do you see examples of cultural diversity being celebrated. All right, where do you see it when you go into a school? Do you see it in the homework that our children or grandchildren are being assigned? Do we see it in the images that are emblazoned on the walls of the school? Do we see it in what students are asked to read? Do we see it in the types of activities that students engage in? Do we see it in their experiential experiences outside of school? Where do we see, right, this idea of cultural diversity, Blackness, Latino-ness, Muslimness, anything that is what folks will consider outside the norm, right? And outside the norm, I mean anything that's not white and Christian. Where do we see other examples of culture being celebrated? And we don't see it often enough. And so when I say culturally responsive, what I'm saying is a culturally responsive school or classroom acknowledges, responds to, and celebrates the diversity of students' cultures in meaningful ways. So oftentimes, cultural diversity is relegated to a particular month. So, students will read about Black folks during Black History Month. They'll read about women during Women's Independence, Women's History Month, excuse me. Right, but it's not embedded in the experiences that students have every day. So you might have a teacher who has some Black students and they'll, buy a couple of Black books and put them in the library. That's not what we mean by being culturally responsive. It needs to be a part of all aspects of a child's learning. Otherwise, it won't take root. And so in the book, I talk about what culturally responsiveness is, and I talk about what it looks like to operationalize it. How do we actualize cultural responsiveness? And so, again, so much of this book is about mindset. And so I encourage folks to reject ideas like colorblindness. Because you'll hear sometimes in schools, teachers say, well, I don't see race. Right? That's a problem. Right? We live in America. We all have racialized identities. And our racialized identities impact how the world views us and how we experience the world. So for anyone to say they don't see race, that is inherently problematic. So I encourage teachers to reject that idea and actually lean into race, right? Lean into race, to reject biases and stereotypes they come into the school with. And we all have them. We talked about the power of socialization just a few minutes ago. All of us walk into a space with stereotypes about people that are different from us. That's just the way it is. So the first step is we have to acknowledge that I believe certain things about certain groups of people based off of not necessarily what I experienced, but what I've heard and what I've seen. And most of what people see about Black folks is trash. So if all I've seen, of all of my experiences about Black people have been something that I've witnessed secondhand, or something I've seen on TikTok or Instagram or in a rap music video, then I come with those ideas. And I'm going to engage with these people in that way because I have this certain mindset. I've adopted certain stereotypes and certain beliefs about these individuals, which is why it's so easy for folks to dismiss Black folks and say what they don't care, what they value, because they don't see many positive images of Black and brown folks on television. They certainly don't see a lot of positive images of Black folks. And so these teachers, right, they aren't living under a rock. I know when I was young, I used to think the teachers lived in a locker in school and they never left. That actually is not true, right? Right? They experience the world. And so they come with these ideas about our people. And then they have to teach our people. And they do so in ways that are inherently problematic. Right? And so what I encourage folks to do is to lean into cultural differences. The diversity of the classroom experiences that students have can be enriched even more if we talk about identity, if we talk about race, if we talk about culture, if we talk about gender, if we allow students to bring their full identities with them, it actually enriches the learning environment. So here's a couple things that I suggest that folks do to become more culturally responsive educators. I'm going to go through these really quickly because we don't have a lot of time. The first is I encourage educators to go on a community walk. So when I was a principal, I led a school in Inglewood, on the South Side. For those who know, it's called Sherman School of Excellence on 52nd and Morgan. And one of the first things that I did as a leader, and this is before it was popular, is we went on a community walk. And the reason why I wanted to do that is because I wanted my teachers and my staff members to see the assets that lived in that community. Because everything that we had heard about Inglewood was all bad, right? It's a highly violent community, high rates of unemployment. The schools in the community aren't good. Like everything was negative, 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 negative. So how do we create a counter story, a counter narrative to that negativity? Because I wanted to make sure that my teachers didn't have low expectations of our children. I also wanted them to see that they come from good stock too. That just because you just saw on the news that 5 people got shot on this corner doesn't necessarily mean that all is bad. And so we walked the neighborhood and we visited the park district and we went to the community service agencies and we met with some violence prevention folks. And we met with folks at the library so they could see how beautiful the library was. They had no idea that these things existed in our community. It was one of those moments like when, that Black women sometimes experience where someone says, hey, can I touch your hair? Right? They just want to touch to see what it feels like. They just need to see it. Oh, it's normal. Look, it's kind of like my hair a little bit, maybe a little kinkier, but it's like just like my hair. They needed to see that there were some good things happening in the community, but they had to be in a position where they could touch it first and experience it. They had to see that there were battered women's shelters that were started by Black women in that neighborhood to serve the needs of a group of women who are oftentimes forgotten about and neglected. They needed to see that kind of dedication to humanity existed in that community. And that we weren't missionaries, that our job wasn't to come in and colonize folks and make folks, convert to a particular way of thinking, that there was already beauty and richness in that neighborhood. And our job was to partner with those individuals, partner with our parents, and partner with the community to make this a better school. But they would have never been able to do that had they stayed inside the school. And we all have seen it before, particularly those of us who worked in schools in the inner cities where, are mostly white teachers. They drive their cars to the school. They get out, they go in, they teach, they get back in the car, and they drive right back out. They know nothing about the neighborhood. And I just wasn't going to allow that to happen on my watch. And quite frankly, it's not just for white teachers, it's also Black teachers too. Because even though I'm from the southeast side of Chicago, I didn't live that experience. So I also am operating a lot of times off of what I think I know. So I needed myself, as the leader of the school, to get into the community to find out exactly what was going on, to connect with folks, to help people understand that, look, we're not scared of you all. Like, we're going to partner with you. We don't have any fear of you. We love you. We want to connect and partner with you. And so many schools, unfortunately, just don't do that. And they don't do it enough. The second thing I'll talk about in terms of being a more culturally responsible school is to invest in hiring teachers of color. The representation matters. That students need to see themselves in positions of authority, like teachers, like principals. I talk about this later in the book, but there oftentimes are these racialized hierarchies that exist within schools. What I mean by that is, if you are a Black and brown student, a Black or brown student, everybody that you see looks like you, typically is either serving lunch, sweeping floors, or their security, right? That's what they see of themselves. Most of their teachers are not going to be Black. Most of their principals aren't necessarily going to be, African-American or Latino, right? They're going to see people like them who are what they consider the licensed educators who have, again, the authority within the school. And that's a problem because, again, that sends a message. And so, I push schools. And if they can't find teachers, because we know that it's sometimes difficult to find teachers of color, then their job is to begin to grow their own, right? How do we begin to grow our own teachers from the communities that we work in? I talk about the student shadow day and how important it is for teachers to build greater empathy with their students by simply putting themselves in the shoes of the student. And so I did this I was actually chief academic officer at this time, where I selected a student randomly, and I just followed that student schedule all day, meaning 8 o'clock, I was sitting in class with that student. I went through the entire day, lunchroom, everything. And wow, what a mind-blowing experience. Because I hadn't been a student in, by that time, 20-some years. So it was very impactful and eye-opening for me to understand what the student experience was like. And so it helped to drive a lot of the way I thought about our school, how we provided professional development for our teachers, and also how we better serve the needs of our students. It helped create a greater sense of empathy. And so that's culturally responsiveness and some actions that schools can take in order to become more culturally responsive. I want to quickly now move to the A, which is affirmation. And the guiding or the essential question here is, do students feel good about who they are when they enter your school or classroom? Right? Do we make students feel good about who they are or do we make them feel bad because they are who we want them to be? Right. And so what we want to do in our schools is we want to make sure that we celebrate, honor, protect, and cultivate the identity of our students. Nobody should feel bad about who they are. No one. Right. So we want to honor who that student is. And we don't want to devalue them or their families, because that happens a lot in schools. Right. We devalue the families that they come from. And students know that. They know when we think less than of their families. Right. We want them to feel good about who they are. And so a couple of ways that I encourage students to do this is by, for example, starting each day with some sort of affirmation or student creed. Again, going back to my days as a turnaround principal in Chicago, every morning before our students went to class, we stood in community and recited this student creed every single morning. Right? I'm a student seeking to be a scholar. The standard is excellence today and tomorrow. If a child begins to say that, they say that every day, right? Just like that rap lyric or that old song, eventually it'll start to have an impact on them. They'll start to believe it themselves. They'll start to digest it and understand it. And I won't get into the brain science around this, right? But we know that that positive student affirmations helps to repair neural pathways in the student. It helps build their sense of self-confidence and esteem. And again, we can't teach children until we invest in their development, until we invest in their academic and personal self-esteem. The other thing that we can do that I encourage educators to do, which is, again, a bit against the grain, is to praise effort, not results. So again, for my parents and my grandparents that are with us, I want you to look for examples in your school of how the school is actually praising your child for the effort that they put in and not for the grade that they got. Right? We put so much emphasis on the grade, so much so that kids know how to do school without really doing school. They know how to do just enough to get a good grade. What we want students to do is to actually learn. And the only way that we can really get them to really invest in learning is by praising the effort and the work that they put in. Right? We can't just focus on the result. Yes, do we want students to get straight A's? Yeah, I guess we do. Right? Do we want them to do well on the test? Yes, we do. And we want to celebrate those students, right, who earn good grades. But we also want to celebrate the student that may have been struggling, but continues to persist and work hard, despite whatever it is that they're going through. Right? It's really, really important that we do that. So, and there's actually research on this. Teresa Perry, she calls it effort optimism. This idea that if we praise students for effort, then they're going to put in more effort, which is going to lead to improved outcomes. And then one of the last strategies that I'll share with educators around this A of affirmation is to make positive phone calls home. There's so many parents
make positive phone calls home.
Never received a positive phone call home from school. Never. So much so that we know that, and parents will tell you, right? They'll say that when the phone rings and it's a school, my stomach hurts because I know it's something bad. And these are the parents that have never, ever received any positive information about their child. That every time the phone rings and it's the school, so-and-so is in trouble again. We had this, we had to send Joe to the dean today. Something negative, right? And you couple that oftentimes with the negative experience that the parent has had. And then we wonder why our parents don't show up to our events and why parents disengage, right? Because everything that they experience with the school is negative. So again, one of the things that we want to do is we want to make sure that we are creating, when I say we, I'm talking about educators in general, we're creating a positive relationship with our parent community. You'll go to a school and I ask schools all the time, like, where's your student code of conduct? What are your discipline policy guidelines? And they can ramble them off super quick, right? No problem. They can show me to a binder. They could pull up some kind of form, and bam, it's there. And then I say, tell me how you celebrate students. And then I get the two twins, Ura and Dura. Nobody knows. Nobody can tell me how we celebrate kids because it's not systematized, right? They can't tell me how they affirm kids. Why? Because it's something that they do ad hoc. It's not something that the school as a whole is committed to. This teacher does this teacher does this, but we don't have a systematic way of affirming the identity of our students. And that's a problem. That's a problem. That's why we have so many students who struggle in our schools. The R is for relationships. And I can't say enough how important it is that educators establish positive relationships with their students. To me, it is the most important thing that any educator can do. I learned this from being a longtime teacher. I learned it from being a leader of teachers. I'm learning it now, right? As a college professor, that if I don't have strong relationships with my students, it impacts the their learning environment. And so we're not talking about establishing friendships, we're talking about relationships, right? So it's how do I create positive connections with my students? How do I develop positive rapport for my students? Because when you do that, students will be more likely to engage in the academic process. And so these are a couple of reminders, right? And this is something that Dr. James Comer said years ago, right? No significant learning occurs without a significant relationship. And that you can apply that to the child school space. You can also apply it to the adult workspace, right? It's the same thing. And then Rita Pearson, who gave a TED talk many years ago, may she rest in peace. She said, kids don't learn from people they don't like. And that's the truth. If kids don't like you, they don't have a relationship with you, they won't learn from you. And James Baldwin said it too. He said, look, right, you can't teach kids you don't love. If you're not willing to put the time into developing a relationship with the child, you can't teach the child, right? So here's a couple of things that I encourage that people do, right? Greet students at the door. Again, not earth-shattering, right? But it's a way to begin to establish that personal relationship. Give a kid a fist bump, a hug, a salute, something, right? Something at the beginning of the day. So again, because it humanizes you and it shows the student that you are humanizing them, right? The other piece that's so important is addressing the social emotional needs of students. And so even today in my grad school courses, I begin every single class with the social emotional check-in, right? Where I either put up a set of emojis like you see here and say, hey, select the emoji that best describes how you feel today, or 2-word check-in. All right. Share two words that best describe how you feel today. All right. And that's helpful for me because I then get a sense of how people are feeling emotionally and mentally before we jump into the content of the course. All right. But again, it also sends a message to students that I care about you, not just as a student in my class, but as a human being. And these are things that don't take but 5 or 10 minutes. Right. You don't have to invest a lot of time in this. And then, the other thing is just shut up and listen. Just be quiet and listen. Just let students talk about how they feel. What's happening in the hood? What happened this weekend? And where I was oftentimes start my classes like that. What happened this weekend? Some jumped off and, they want to talk about it. It happened on the weekend. It's Monday. We're not getting to real learning until they can start to express what they went through and how they feel. And we have to be willing as adults, be willing to do that. Even with our own biological children, sometimes we just got to shut up and listen. And then lastly, I encourage educators to go and see their students outside of the classroom, right? Go see a student who's an athlete in the game. Go see a student that's taking piano in the piano recital. Go, if you know a student is working at Target, go to Target and see them at work and check in on them. They work at the corner store. Go to the corner store, right, and check them out. Again, it's another way to forge bonds with students. And then the E of the CARE framework is empowerment. Right, and I know I'm going fast, and I apologize for that. But the essential question here is, how are you empowering students to reach their full potential? Right? For so many of our students, school is a disempowering place. They feel like they don't have permission to be their best selves. We haven't granted them the authority to be great, and teachers have the ability to do that. So here's a couple of strategies. One, I encourage all educators, and I hope that you do too, to reject the achievement gap. That's language that we need to bury. One, it centers whiteness as the goal. And we know that if we look at nationally, right, like our white students when compared to white students from around the world don't perform as high. So that should not be the standard. 2, we shouldn't be comparing white students and black students because black students have fundamentally different academic experiences than white students do. And there's other reasons that I won't get into right now. We got to reject that language. We got to reject the attitude gap because, again, this is language that blames black kids. If most black kids deserve to have attitude when they go to school. That's how people don't agree with that. I don't care. Right, the way they're treated, the way opportunities are hoarded from them, they deserve to have attitude. You might not like it, but it's the reality of it, right? But there is an opportunity gap. There is an opportunity gap. Our black and brown kids, and again, research and experience show this, they don't have access to the same opportunities as their white peer. They don't. They don't have access to gifted enrichment, advanced placement, and that's because we have low expectations of black kids, right? So a couple of things I suggest. One, we can empower students by giving them agency, by giving them opportunities to decide how they want to show or demonstrate mastery or proficiency. Everybody shouldn't have to take a multiple choice test. Everybody shouldn't have to write an essay. There's many different ways that we can show expertise and show command of a particular content area. And I encourage schools to figure out how to do that. De-emphasize grades. Again, not a popular sentiment. But we put so much pressure and so much attention on grades. And we don't really know what grades really mean, because I've been in schools where 2 teachers are teaching the same subject. and they have different requirements for how to get an A. How is that possible? That's because we haven't reached consensus on what grades are and what they represent. But we put so much emphasis on it. And what I encourage schools to do, de-emphasize the grades. Let's talk about the learning. That the expectation here is that you learn. I don't care about the grade. I tell students now in my grad school courses, everybody gets an A because I don't give a doggone about grades. What I care about is that you walk out of here having learned more and gotten better as a leader. That's my goal. And I had the same message when I was a high school history teacher. I don't care about the grade. I want you to understand the significance of history and how it's relevant to your current life, right? I'll end with this. And I've said this enough already. We have to prioritize academic experiences. So in the book, I end with just a call to action. Say, hey, let's have the courage and the wisdom to reimagine how we educate our kids, to disrupt things that we've done historically, because they aren't working, right? And there's a word for people who do the same thing over and over and over again and expect a different result. Right? We have a whole system, a whole industry that's done the same thing over and over and over again, and we're expecting somehow magically that things are going to be different. But until we rethink and reimagine how we educate our kids, we'll continue to have the same issues that we have right now, which are historically minoritized students having subpar academic experiences, it impacting their ability to achieve, and it impacting the trajectory on their life. And that's just not acceptable. So thank you all so much for listening to me, for being here with us today. I really appreciate you taking time out of your busy Sundays and sitting on this Zoom call. I'm going to stop my screen share right now and open it up. If anyone has, I know it's after 2, but if you have any questions, feel free to take yourself off mute, ask your question or make your comment.
Well, let me jump in first, since you have. Assalamu alaikum. First of all, Dr. Lionel, congratulations on your book. I'm looking forward to purchasing a copy or two.
Thank you,
I'm somewhat removed from the educational process, but the passion that you just exhibited has motivated me to get more involved. You covered so much material, it's hard to know where to start, but there were a couple of things that caught my attention. And one of those is the community walks as part of the process of education. When I was in the work world with SEIU, part of the requirement for a presidential candidate to get the endorsement was that they walked in the shoes of, say, a home care worker, spent a day home care worker in order to see what that person does for a living. And that happened with Clinton, Obama, and Vice President Harris. The other thing that you mentioned about colorblindness, I think that we've been seduced, particularly as African-American people, to buy into let's not see color. That's when right. our real life is actually, dealing with people who do see color. So we have to be realistic about that. And lastly, you described my grammar school principal in your process of getting out with the community, going to the games, taking an active role in the real life of the students. And I really appreciated that. It just reminded me of how great he was and how we don't have those kinds of people now.
That's right.
To the extent that we used to have them, and I don't know how we get them. That's a different topic, but I wanted to just mention that.
Well, thank you, and I'm trying. Thank you, Brother Rod. And I'm trying. When I work with aspiring leaders. For those who don't know what I do, I'm a college professor. Much of my work is around school leadership development. I work with principals. But I really have been pushing my students to rethink their roles, not just as school leaders or instructional leaders, but as community leaders, because that's necessary. And when I was a principal, I learned very early on that if I was not engaged in the community in positive ways, that nothing that I was trying to accomplish was going to be realized, because you can't do it without the community. And so just sending that message to aspiring leaders is just really, really important. I see Imam Tariq has his hand up. Go ahead, brother. Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum assalam, Dr. Lionel. I truly appreciate your presentation. And I think as Brother Rod said, that the passion that comes from you for the subject and for your work you know, it's palpable and inspiring. And while you were speaking specifically about education, your response to Brother Rod really is something that I was thinking along the lines of, which is the principles that you're talking about have great resonance and relevance for community leadership.
That's right.
And think about that even within not just the masjid in particular, but just houses of worship broadly.
Yes.
Now, if those, you know, if the types of relationships that you talk about are not present, that impacts the learning experience, because it's not just an experience of people coming in and hearing a word and feeling good, walking away.
Right.
But it's also about us becoming better. So as we want our students to become better in the schools, we also want to become better in any space where the community dynamic is present. And the last thing I would mention is that if I haven't lost the point, you know what? I think I did.
We'll come back to you, brother. Thank you.
Thank you
So much. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think we forget that how vulnerable of a process that learning is. Right, you learn how to read more oftentimes than not on the lap of your mother. That's a vulnerable process. It takes humility and vulnerability to admit that you don't know something and to accept some guidance from someone else. And so we forget that sometimes. And when we forget that learning is inherently a vulnerable process, we forget the sense of the relationship. Right. And that's something that, and I know teachers who are struggling with 30 students in the classroom and all kind, I get all upset in that seat. I understand what it's like to not have enough desks for your students. The way you get through that, though, is through the establishment of the relationship. Because your student, when you have a relationship with your students as a teacher, they'll be more graceful with you too. They'll give you a pass when you're having a bad day. They're more likely to, again, proactively and productively engage in the learning that you're trying to facilitate. Mm-hmm. When I go into a classroom and I see teachers with bad classroom management or poor classroom management, it's because they don't have relationships with their students, almost in every instance. So anyway, thank you for that. Brother Bill.
Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Lionel.
Wow.
Yeah, this is actually the second time I've heard you present your book, and I realized I could listen to it a third time.
Oh,
well, the kind of question, and yeah, the concepts are just really really helpful, and just kind of open. It just feels like I opened my eyes to some of the things that's so important to do as a teacher. The question I had, and as you probably know, my son Devin is a counselor on the faculty of College DuPage, and it seemed to me, and I know you're obviously teaching college now too, that a lot of the things that you talk about are applicable on that level, right? Even on a college level. But the main question I had was, like, particularly the way Devin describes it to me, that let's say at a community college, or particular like the one he's at, where there's a lot of different students from very different backgrounds, very different cultures, and that whole idea of trying to tie into where they're at, and paying attention to the context they grew up in and all that. How would you say that you apply the principles that you have in that kind of situation?
Yeah, that's a really great question. Thank you, Brother Bill. So when you are in a situation where, for example, I worked with a student, she was an elementary school resident principal. There were 50 different languages spoken in her school. You couldn't get more diverse than that. So am I expecting a teacher to put a cultural reference in every single assignment or every single lesson that they craft? Absolutely not. What I do expect for that teacher to do is to provide the space for students to bring their own cultural knowledge and own cultural references to the classroom. All right. And I think that's the part that's the key part, is giving the students and their families license to bring their full self, their full authentic selves into the school environment. And we honor that by allowing them to present themselves in ways that are most comfortable for them, that we create a learning environment that's not rooted in competition, but that's rooted in community and collaboration so we can all learn from one another. Because as I said before, there's real beauty in that diversity. There's many opportunities to enrich each other. One of the things that we're supposed to be teaching in schools is cultural competence. Like I should be able to go to school and learn about the cultures of people who are different from me because I'm in a space where that should be happening. But we don't, as I said before, rather than lean into cultural difference and diversity, we want to say we're colorblind. And what we end up doing is teaching to the middle. We teaching, and to the middle means I teach in a very sort of Eurocentric way that does not take into consideration the learning styles, the modalities that work with students who are non-white, who are non-Christian, who are not privileged, right? Which in our country now, more than half of our student population identifies as a person of color, right? And so it's important that we be more thoughtful about how we give students the space to be able to express themselves fully in school and not, place them inside of a box and say, if you, color outside the lines, if you step outside this box, you're going to be considered a failing student. Brother Clyde.
I'm sorry, I didn't have my mic up. Well, I know it's very late, but I couldn't resist. So every really successful situation I've been in, working with students who fit the demographics of the students that you're probably most affected by some of the issues you brought, pretty much every characteristic that you mentioned has been a characteristic of those environments. And I've never really listed them. So thank you for listing them for me.
Yes, sir.
I'll mention one and I'll jump off. When I was president at Olive Harbor, we had something, it was an alternative high school, and it was called the Middle College. So even in the name, there's expectations are kind of, hinted.
That's right.
And we only took students who were dropouts or signouts from the public. It wasn't like other charter schools where if you lived in the neighborhood, it was only students who had been either kicked out or signed out by their parents. And I spent a lot of time there because I was trying to figure out, okay, what are they doing?
Right.
And it hit me. The minute a student walked into that school, they were not even addressed by their name anymore. They were called scholar.
That's right.
All day. That's what they were called. And we had almost no dropouts. And even if you asked them to stay home, some of them would be in tears because they had to stay home from school. Okay. And again, these were the incorrigibles, et cetera, in the public school. And those students were graduating high 90% points of graduates. Most of them graduated with college credits because they could also co-enroll in college classes. We had to stop some of them from graduating with an associate degree. They were trying to double up on the classes. So it's the last one I mentioned is my close friend. They really like family in Detroit. His daughter just took over a school in Detroit. Supposedly terrible public school. They had never gotten more than 5 to 10% of the parents to even turn out. So here's again expectations about parents.
That's right.
She's assistant principal and the new principal. They got in, they really dug into the parents on behalf of their children. And they called a meeting and they got 90 parents out to the first meeting.
That's it.
Expectations.
And being willing to step outside of your own comfort zone to go out and find the parents where they are.
Oh, they knocked on doors.
That's what you have to do. And so the community said, man, if these ladies are willing to come outside the school and walk down our block, knock on our doors, then that means something to me. Because we hear people say all the time, well, we got an open door. Well, what good is it if nobody walks through the door? And no, that doesn't make any bit of difference. Imam said he just put in the chat, he said, I used the word agency in the way it was new. Can I revisit it? So simply put, when I say agency, the student agency in particular, what I'm saying is it's important that we give students voice and choice and how they learn and how they demonstrate what they know. And we don't give students much agency in school. Because here's the other piece. And I know we're coming up, way over time. So much about school now. And I want everybody to hear what I'm saying here because I want you to go out and see it for yourself if you don't believe it. so much about school that's happening in Black and brown communities comes down to control of Black and brown bodies. It's about compliance. And I'm saying that to you as a turnaround principal where I was lauded, I was praised, right? Because I was able to control Black and brown bodies. When people were coming to the school, when I took over Sherman, it was the second worst performing school in the state of Illinois. It was ravaged by gangs. It was like the opening scene to Lean on Me. It was off the chain. When people would come after our first month in the school, the only thing they were concerned about was they would say, Mr. Allen, how you get kids to walk down the hall in straight lines? How you get kids to have, conversations in the cafeteria without fighting each other? Expectations. They didn't care that their students were also like learning. That never came up. What they were most impressed with and what they wanted to shake my hand and pat me on the back about, look at this big Black man controlling these Black boys and girls. Woo-hoo, he's the one. And I had to tell him, I ain't the one. Like, you're not gonna have me out here, being, I wanted to be Joe Clark 2.0, but I realized early on that that's not the way. That we have to be investing in the development of our children's minds, right? But so much comes down to, can you control kids? So how do you control people? You take choice from them. How do you control your students? Lecture them for 40 minutes. Give them 5 pages of ditto sheets to fill out. That's how you control them. That's how you keep them quiet. And so when I say agency, that's what I'm talking about. It's a teacher surrendering control for the betterment of the school environment. All right, it's 2:16, everybody. I'm going to, in the interest of time and out of respect for everybody who was here, I want to go ahead and close this out. I thank you all so much for being with me today. Let's close out with Walasa. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Walasa. Inna lansana lafi kusra. Ila eladina amanu wa amilu salihati. Watwasaf bil haq. Watwasaf bis sabr. Amin.
Amin.
I look forward to your book signing coming up.
Amin.
Yes. So I mentioned at the very beginning that we're going to try to do a book signing within the next couple of weeks. I will have books with me on Friday. I'm going to bring them, inshallah, to the masjid. So I have some books there. We'll try to do a more fun, formal book signing thing at the masjid. I'm just, again, want to reiterate how I'm just so thankful to be a part of this community. I wish I had been born into it or had found it 25 years ago, but Allah saw fit that I would be a part of this community since 2015, 16. And I tell you, I just so grateful and thankful to all of you. And again, thank you for this platform. And I look forward to seeing everybody next week, inshallah, at Jummah. Assalamu alaikum.
Inshallah.
Wa alaikum assalam.